After the morality card, which we discussed in chapter 1 of this series, your next instinct might be to play the scripture card, which claims that scripture, meaning the Bible and Quran, for instance, provide unfalsifiable evidence of the existence of God. Even if you're an apologist who makes concessions, such as the context of the era during which it was written, or that some records might contain minor embellishments, you likely continue to hold scripture as true, at least for the really meaningful events and sufficient evidence that God exists. Even if you accept allegorical interpretation of some passages, you will probably not accept that God himself might be an allegory. Even the most liberal apologist, in other words, will not compromise on God being the cause of life in the universe. Jew, Christian, or Muslim, you will most likely affirm that God has always been and remains in a position of eternal supreme authority. You will also probably assert that as something that God created in his image, you are required and expected to acknowledge this in some way. To begin, I will say that no book by itself provides unfalsifiable evidence of anything. Darwin's Origin of Species, for instance, would provide no evidence of evolution without all the other data that corroborates Darwin's theories, such as the millions of studies on animals, plants, and microorganisms conducted since Origin of the Species was published in 1859, found crushingly in agreement with Darwin's theories. In the same vein, Holocaust deniers have tried to allege that Anne Frank's diary was a forgery. Their allegations failed to hold up in court, but not because the book itself is somehow unfalsifiable. Through the careful work of her father, Otto Frank, we have the original diary pages, and they have been scrupulously preserved and analyzed. The diary, which Otto had published in 1947, provides one of the precious few first-hand written testimonials of Jews hiding and ultimately murdered during the Holocaust. But we must acknowledge that by itself, the diary provides insufficient evidence of a Holocaust. Let's say that World War II ended in nuclear war and almost all humans were wiped out. Imagine a group of archaeologists digging up the diary in a pile of rubble in what was once Holland. By itself, Anne's diary would not prove to those archaeologists that a Holocaust took place. The reality is, mankind was not obliterated by nuclear weapons, so the diary is now part of a massive global archive that confirms Holocaust atrocities. Photos, films, victim testimonies, travel records, interviews, stolen property, mass graves, and the ruins of death camps all over Germany and Poland. For the very reason that people might try to deny the war crimes, Eisenhower took it upon himself to send journalists to Poland and Germany in the aftermath. While touring the first camp liberated by Americans, Ohrdruf, Eisenhower realized that the magnitude of the crimes would be so shocking that people might find them hard to believe. So he invited the New York Times and Life magazine, among others, to visit the camps before everything was cleaned up. Good thing he did, because this evidence was instrumental in convicting Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg. By any stretch of international law or the imagination, Anne's diary would not have been enough to do that. All the evidence together tells us that the Holocaust took place. No single book could or would be trusted with something so important. In fact, books must be assessed with the same scrutiny as everything else. Writing something down is actually an excellent way to pass it off a lie. Humans are naturally more reverent of the written word. We are more likely to obey a sign reading "do not enter" than a bystander saying "don't go in there." Marshall McLuhan famously said that the medium is the message, meaning that the medium through which information is imparted informs the reader about whether or not to trust the statements being made. Case in point, a woman by the name of Misha de Fonseca wrote a harrowing tale about how, as a girl, she survived the Holocaust by hiding in the woods and befriending wolves. Misha and the Wolves was a gripping account of survival against all odds, determination, and the strength of the human spirit. But it never happened. The woman's real name was Monique Duval, and she wasn't even Jewish. She was raised by a Catholic family in Belgium. Compared to the backstory she concocted as a bid for attention and a means to becoming a published writer, Duval lived a sheltered and rather dull childhood. Same period of history as Anne Frank. One's true and one isn't. They both were published, and for a time, both were believed. Anne's book stood up to scrutiny of the evidence. Duval's book did not. No corroborating evidence exists for Scripture. In fact, a lot of evidence does anything but corroborate it. Scripture is alleged to be the result of thousands of generations of people protecting the chain of custody. But in the case of the Christian Bible, for instance, we can't establish chain of custody for anything before the Christian church assumed stewardship of a set of manuscripts in the 3rd century CE. We know that the Catholic Church has always had an excellent grasp of storytelling. They added things to Christian canon along the way to make the story more interesting. Catholics are generally discouraged from reading the Bible, so they don't know that these stories aren't in there. The ascension of the Virgin Mary into heaven upon her death, the legend of St. Christopher, who carried the Christ child across a river, St. Veronica, who wiped the face of Jesus with her veil while he was being crucified, and the flight of the Holy Family into Egypt were all invented to make the backstory more compelling. It is as easy for a human to make up a story than to record one. In fact, it's easier. And we all know how humans like things to be easy. Don't be fooled by the details they throw in to make it feel real, like place names and the names of known kings or known laws of the period. Monique Duval's supposed journey through Belgium, Germany, and Poland during World War II, where many Holocaust atrocities occurred, anchored her story in the familiar landscape of European wartime history, making it believable. She was careful to keep the dates consistent with history, such as the date that Belgium was first occupied and when her fake Jewish parents were loaded on a train for Auschwitz. She was careful to include details like yellow stars, curfews, and getting help from members of the resistance. All of these accurate details helped her defraud the public and pass off a fabricated memoir as a true account of events. The Scripture card postulates that because the Bible has been trusted for centuries, it's infallible and trustworthy today. The fact that something's been trusted in the past is not enough reason to trust it forever. For all we know, the books of the Bible are allegorical. We have nothing to provide any clarity on whether they were intended so or not. Therefore, we can't really make that determination. Some books could be mythological accounts passed down via oral tradition, then eventually committed to papyrus, making their way through libraries and synagogues to Rome and ultimately the Bible we know today. Some parts of the Bible could have been hastily slapped together in the 3rd century to provide a cohesive story that would cover all of human history, such as the stories of Adam and Eve, Abraham, Noah's Ark. We have no corroborating texts, nothing to confirm that the events happened as described. Their continuity since the 3rd century is somewhat traceable, but not before that. And before that spans thousands of years of humans, a lot like Monique Duval, with ulterior motives, access to quills, ink, papyrus, and the lively Homo sapiens imagination.